Hello and welcome to this APS Living History of Physiology session. My name is Ebbe Eldrup. I'm a consultant endocrinologist and Doctor of Medical Sciences at the Department of Endocrinology, Herlev University Hospital in Copenhagen, Denmark. Today I'm proud to interview my mentor, Professor and Doctor of Medical Sciences, Niels Juul Christensen, who worked at the Department of Endocrinology, Herlev University Hospital since 1977 and until 2011. Niels is a gifted clinician and a globally recognized scientist. Niels, could you please tell us a little about your background?
Thank you. I was born shortly before World War II started. I remember the end of the war, the capitulation. British troops arrived and everyone was happy. I started primary school after the war and I did well. There was no secondary school where I lived and I was admitted to boarding school. After I had obtained my high school diploma in 1957, it was my plan to become a doctor. I may have been inspired by our family doctor. When as a child I had high fever, he would always come to our house and he examined me carefully, although there was not much he could do. No penicillin was available and parents were most concerned about whether you could have polio.
Then you continued studies at the university. Which people did you pay attention to?
I studied medicine from 1957 to 1964. At Aarhus University School of Medicine. The first year referred to anatomy, physiology, and biochemistry, and then follow all clinical disciplines. I wanted to be a doctor, but I also became interested in science. I may have been inspired by some of my teachers. Jens Schou was professor of physiology and well known for his studies of sodium-potassium pumps. Knud Lundbæk was a professor of endocrinology and well known for his studies of diabetic angiopathy. So after I had obtained my medical degree, I asked Knud Lundbæk if he would help me to achieve a thesis. He wanted me to study blood flow in the feet of diabetic patients. I had to build a plethysmograph. I observed that the spontaneous viability in the resting blood flow was reduced. The blood flow was more constant in some diabetic patients, obviously due to sympathetic denervation. Interestingly, a few years later, a group from Britain reported a similar abnormality or a parallel abnormality in heart rhythm. The beat-to-beat variation in heart rhythm was more constant in some diabetic patients than in normal subjects. So I became interested in studying the sympathetic nervous system and catecholamines, norepinephrine, using newer techniques.
You have been studying many areas within the sympathetic nervous system. I'm sure people out there would be interested in which highlights you would outline for us today.
We showed that insulin had various effects on the cardiovascular system despite blood glucose was normal. We showed that insulin decreased plasma volume and plasma albumin and also increased sympathetic activity. We also showed that the kidney was sensitive to insulin and insulin increased urinary albumin excretion temporarily and glucose had no effect. And when all glucose was given to juvenile diabetics, there was no increase in urinary albumin excretion, whereas insulin did increase albumin excretion. In patients with permanent albuminuria and diabetic nephropathy, there was no increase by or change by insulin. The mechanism of these changes has now been explained by two groups, Cohen and Ley and Pikowska et al. In 2013. Insulin contracts the podocytes, which cover the membrane of the glomerulus, and albumin excretion may therefore increase temporarily. Insulin deficiency results in apoptosis of the podocytes. Permanent albuminuria develops after podocytes have died. Thus, diabetic nephropathy may, at least in part, be due to insulin deficiency rather than hypoglycemia. Patients still die of diabetic nephropathy, and it is possible there could be some improvement if the insulin was administered in a different way, or another drug which could contract podocytes temporarily may be of interest.
These are some early studies, though still cited in the literature today. But which later studies do you find interesting as well?
In 1977, I was offered a position in Copenhagen as chief physician at the new Herlev University Hospital. Professor Laurits Korsgaard Christensen was head of the department and well known for his studies of thyroid diseases. I worked in the clinic, but had ample time to work in the laboratory. And in 1993, I was elected as professor of endocrinology at the University of Copenhagen. I had many excellent collaborators, and we studied sympathetic activity during exercise in the elderly in Cytopletics. And we also did experiments to counteract the effect of gravitational stress on the circulation. My laboratory obtained samples from space and from astronauts in collaboration with ESA, NASA, and Roscosmos, and I also visited Star City in Russia. We found unexpectedly that the sympathetic activity was increased in space despite the lack of gravitational stress. It may be a compensation to vessel relaxation in space, but the mechanism has not been clarified. These findings are mainly of interest during long-term flights.
Could you tell us something about the methods that you used to study sympathetic activity?
Sympathetic activity can be evaluated by two different methods, either by measuring the neurotransmitter norepinephrine in plasma, or by recording electric activity in sympathetic nerves in muscle sympathetic nerve activity. Several studies have shown that results obtained by these two techniques are closely correlated and changes in parallel. And this is probably due to the fact that the sympathetic activity is controlled by the central nervous system, and therefore changes in parallel in different organs. You can also measure you can also use a tracer to measure the spillover to plasma, but the problem is that you don't know if the specific activity of the norepi tracer in plasma is similar to that at the breakdown sites. It has also been shown that the release of norepi from nerve endings in different organs is greater than the spillover to plasma. Now, skin sympathetic activity can be measured by microdialysis and inserting a microdialysis probe under the skin, which is perfused and sensitive, permeable to norepinephrine, which diffuses from the interstitium into the probe, and the norepinephrine concentration can be measured in the dialysate. This is in fact a rather good technique. You can also measure norepi in the cerebrospinal fluid, and in tissues the concentration of norepinephrine reflects the density of the innervation. For example, in cancer tissue with no nerves, there are no norepinephrine. Perhaps we should say a few words about epinephrine. Epinephrine is important for the control of blood glucose, and especially for diabetic patients who may develop hypoglycemia. And Professor Philip Cryer and his collaborators in St. Louis have published many important studies about these problems. We measured epinephrine in the blood in a large group of elderly subjects, and we showed that the basal level of epinephrine was correlated with the survival rate. This is probably due to the fact that the basal epinephrine level in the elderly reflects the physical working capacity. We have also studied epinephrine in the cerebrospinal fluid and shown that the concentration is reduced in patients with depression and returned to normal after they have been treated and the depression has disappeared. Maybe we should say a few words about dopamine, which is also a catecholamine. Dopamine is very important in the central nervous system, closely related to diseases as Parkinson's disease and schizophrenia. But there are also substantial amounts of dopamine outside the central nervous systems, but you know more about that than me.
Thank you. But let's also shortly review some of your most recent findings.
We continue our studies of catecholamines, but we also develop a technique to measure RNA ribonucleic acids. This was, of course, based on reverse transcription and the polymerase chains reaction, but we also included a high-pressure liquid chromatograph in the analytical system, and therefore we were able to measure not only the concentration of RNA, but also the length of the fragment. And we discovered what turned out to be a long non-coding RNA fragment, which we designated HCD. HCD was inversely related to TSH receptor autoantibodies in patients with Graves' disease and therefore to autoimmunity. We also showed in transfection studies that HCD increased toll-like receptor 7, not surprisingly, but it also decreased CD14 messenger RNA, and there may therefore not be sufficient CD14 available for toll-like receptor 4, which is important for the production of autoantibodies and antibodies. It is possible that a drug which can increase the level of HCD in the cytoplasma of monocytes may limit the development of autoimmune diseases such as type 1 diabetes and Graves' disease.
You have obviously done a tremendous scientific effort. Please, can you shortly mention your most significant contributions to physiology?
I believe that my most significant contribution to physiology are the demonstration that the kidney is sensitive to insulin. And we have studied the regulation of the cardiovascular system and sympathetic activity during a number of conditions, inclusive space. And we have also discovered a long non-coding RNA fragment, which may be important for autoantibody production. I would also like to mention that I have been teaching medical students for more than 40 years, and I have in fact been awarded a prize as the best teacher of the year.
Many years ago, you were invited to join the American Physiological Society. How has APS been valuable to you?
I was most honored when I, several years ago, was admitted to membership of the American Physiological Society. And I have participated in many meetings in the United States dealing with physiology. The distance between Denmark and the United States has been a barrier. But now, with the use of the internet, it's easy to study all results published by the society.
Finally, given your very impressive career in clinical medicine and physiological science, what are the advices that you can give a young colleague?
I'm also grateful for cooperation with many talented physiologists and endocrinologists. A young student starting out in science today should find a compatible or choose a compatible mentor. The laboratory should not be too small, and it's important to know if former research assistants have obtained their PhD and thesis. If you want to continue with science, you should start your independent career and try to establish yourself in a new area. Something unexpected may come up, and this is the time to take a risk.
Thank you very much, Niels.
Thank you.